Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Optimal Wealth Podcast, where we discuss creating passive income through real estate. Our mission is to help educate investors on how to grow wealth and invest passively. My name is Jared Alexander, and I am a passive investor, currently in 6 syndications as a limited partner. I am also the founder of Optimal Equity Group, which is a real estate investment firm that was created primarily to help educate the passive investor. We do that in a couple of different ways. One is we provide education to help give you the confidence to get into the passive investing space. And two, each episode we will interview amazing guests that explore the strategies, insights, and secrets used by successful investors. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out on your real estate journey, this podcast is designed to help give you the confidence and knowledge you need to make informed and profitable decisions. Welcome to another episode of the Optimal Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Alexander, and today I'm excited to dive deep into the space of multifamily with our guest, Vince. Vince, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here, Jared. Thanks.
Real quick before we get started, Vince and I met at a conference. Actually, Vince was a featured speaker there. And after hearing his story and his experience of how he got into the space of real estate, I just had to have him on the show and dive a little deeper into his background, and definitely know it'll be a good value to our listeners today, and just bringing a different perspective, or really just a creative way of doing deals, right? And so a real quick background on Vince. Vince is a real estate investor based in Phoenix. Currently has 2 cash flowing multifamily properties in South Dakota, in the South Dakota market, and has gone from 2 to 35 doors in the last 4 years. He currently leads a data analytics and reporting team at a large North American bank. And when not reviewing the next potential real estate deal or attending a meetup, he is heavily involved with his church and Cub Scout Pack. So, yeah, Vince, we were just talking a little bit before the show, doing the Cub Scouts. You got a 7 and 11-year-old.
Yep.
So needless to say, you stay pretty busy.
Yeah. Between my full-time job, a little bit of time set aside for real estate, and the kids. Yeah, there's always something going on.
Yeah, no, I relate to that. Where I'm got a 5-year-old, and we're just starting t-ball, and of course, I'm coaching the team, right? So, which is an absolute blast. But definitely get just kind of one thing to another, Well, if let's do this, Vince. Why don't dive a little bit more into your story? How you decided, how did you get into this space of real estate?
Yeah, so growing up, my parents certainly didn't have any real estate or anything like that. Didn't really have any exposure to it, any landlords other than we rented occasionally. Grew up in Army brat, so most of it was just on post housing. But there was a few times where we would have rented, and then through college, I was a renter. And my wife and I were living in Houston, Texas at the time, and the oil market tanked quite a bit. And I worked for a company that was very closely related to the oil market, being in Houston. And so I was laid off, and my wife was moved from a full-time position to a contract position. So she wasn't very steady in her role either. And in between, obviously applying everywhere, looking for a new role, I also felt like I don't feel great right now in that position. Mm-hmm. What can I do to get out of this, either immediately or long term? And so, there's tons of talking heads on YouTube and different things, but certainly one of the things I came across that's pretty popular across the real estate space is Bigger Pockets. Yeah. And so I listened to probably every episode of their podcast that was available. Yeah. I think since then I've bought and or listened to all of their books, amongst a few other personalities and things. But that was really a turning point where I said, I think this might be doable. So as part of that process, I also took a job out here in Phoenix, moved from Houston to Phoenix, moved the whole family out here in January of 2018. And around that same time started picking up a little more interest in real estate. And I guess it took a little while, right? I wasn't the quickest study, I guess. But in 2020, I started attending a meetup hosted by a friend of ours, and had gone to 6, 7, 8 meetups. And I was driving clear across Phoenix. For those familiar, I live in Ahwatukee. This meetup was in North Scottsdale, sometimes even up in Desert Ridge. And I had driven all the way there, about 45 minutes, and walked in for, like I said, the 6th, 7th, 8th time, and just had this imposter syndrome. Every time I had showed up, I had told the people the same story, like, "Oh yeah, I'm just kind of looking and getting interested, and I'm going to do something." And every time these people were telling new deals they were doing, they were turning, buying vacant land in Scottsdale and turning it into this huge container apartment complex thing, or flipping, a 40-unit apartment complex, or doing all these big things, millions of dollars, right? And every month it was new stories from everyone, new projects, new deals they were working on.
Right.
And so after doing that a couple of times, I walked right out. I was in there probably 3 minutes, had some chips or something, walked right back out to my car, and told myself, I'm not going to come back to this thing until I have a deal. And about 6 months later, I was able to go back. I had just secured a duplex in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and felt a lot better walking into that one.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to you on that. I was when I first started getting into space, same like you, Vince. I listened to a ton of Bigger Pockets episodes. I mean, just a ton of them, and became, very encouraged that, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm not exactly sure how, but I'm gonna do it. But I was in that analysis paralysis phase. I think you definitely have to educate yourself before you get involved in really anything, in this case, real estate. But I wasn't, really sure of how. I was more on a single family route, but I would, hey, they tell you go to the meetups, network, right?
Yeah.
And so I was doing the same thing you are, but I was there and I just felt like an imposter, right? I didn't have any single families under my belt. I'm talking to these guys with multiple millions of dollars in portfolios,
Yeah.
some of them, right? It seemed like it might not have been, but it seemed like everybody had that, right? Compared to what I had, which was nothing at the time. And, so I definitely, get that. But once I did my first single family home and I showed back up at that meetup, I was like, okay, I'm a real estate investor, right? Just like with your duplex there.
Yeah.
It's like now I have something to add. And it's pretty cool because then you got that new guy, you go to that meetup and that new guy that's just getting started looking out. It's like, hey man, I just did this, you can too, right?
Yeah.
And we kind of
You're not a tire kicker anymore.
exactly, right? And you got some value to add to someone else and a little bit more leg to stand on when you're in a circle of guys talking about what you're doing in your your portfolio. So
for sure.
So you get that duplex and in the contract. So you show back up at that meeting. All right, now you're in the game, right? It's like that threshold. Now we step over that threshold, and then what?
Yeah. So I guess kind of long story short, from there, we launched into this plan, my wife and I, that we wanted to double what we were acquiring every year. Okay. And with the understanding that, I don't know how to buy an apartment complex, but we've bought a duplex. That was scary, hard. We definitely learned lessons along the way. Mm-hmm. So buying a fourplex, conceptually and even logistically is no different. It's just probably going to cost more. And so with that in mind, we're looking to purchase about four more units the next year, whether it was two more duplexes, a fourplex, whatever it might look like, right? About 4 or 5 months later, the sellers of that original duplex reached back out to me and said, hey, how's the duplex going? Blah, blah, blah. By the way, we also have this fourplex that we're looking to get rid of. We know it's probably worth more, but basically, long story short, we'll sell it to you for the tax valuation of $250K. Now, I had bought the duplex in a worse part of town, worse shape, for about $150, and this was in 2020, which even compared to now is a bit cheaper than we're looking at these days, but they said for this fourplex, and again, a much better part of town, a Every unit has its own garage, all 2 bed, 1 bath, an as-built fourplex, not a chopped up house or something, for 250. So cheaper a unit than this other property.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm pretty sure I can make that work. I had no idea how I was going to make it work. I didn't have
Right.
enough time to, save up for this down payment or anything, but I knew the deal sounded really good. And I said, hey, if my local realtor can walk it Monday morning, would that be okay? They said, yep, we can meet you there. So I, got off the phone with them, called up my realtor I had used for the first property, and said, hey, this is the address. He's like, I'm familiar with that property. Well, that location. I actually live down the street from it. It's a good part of town. It's a great looking property, having driven by it almost daily. He said, if you don't take this deal, I will.
All right.
So long story short, he walked it Monday morning. We already had the contract ready to go, the purchase agreement. And so yeah, 2-3 days later, we had it under contract for 250. Got traditional financing on that one. And for the appraisal, it appraised for 425. So
Wow.
immediately had 40% equity in it. Had $175,000 equity right at close. So that was a solid win.
And so I'm curious, and because you bought the duplex, I'm assuming traditional financing as well,
Mm-hmm.
what, 20-25% down?
25. Yep.
25. And so you know get that under your belt, right? The first one. Now, so the same owners,
Mm-hmm.
right, have this fourplex down the road. I mean, I think I just want to touch on the power of relationship, right?
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
staying in front of people, because just because you do one deal, and I want to touch on this too, Vince, because I know we talked about this at the conference as well when you were speaking, is just the power of the professionalism, right? How you
Yeah.
presented yourself. Right. I mean, if you're looking on video here, Vince is, got the Mathis shirt on, right?
Yeah.
He's
Got the hat.
got the hat right there. I mean, if you didn't know his portfolio by just him telling it, like, you would think this guy's, got, 40 properties under his portfolio, right? Or you wouldn't know, but just
Right.
presenting yourself in that way, which to a seller, it's like, hey, this guy means business. You got a good mannerism. And because with that, I mean, it's just unheard of that you get a fourplex under, $250,000.
Yeah. And they bring it to you, right? Like,
and they bring it to you.
Wholesalers are a good wholesaler can find a property at 70% of value, but you don't often have people approach you with that offer. So yeah, it was definitely a combination of that very first close on the duplex. I had already gotten some of these things to make myself kind of look the part of a professional investor, as well as being professional and starting to build that relationship. I knew they had a couple properties from looking up the property and looking up the sellers and the tax records, right? And so I wanted to build that connection. Another thing is that duplex was just about 100 years old, right? It had clay sewer lines. It had original chimney and stuff going from the basement out to the top, and needed a lot of love. We invested quite a bit of capital into that property. And so obviously I say that to say that at the inspection, all kinds of things came up, right? The thing was a book. All kinds of things I could have hemmed and hawed and nickeled and dimed the sellers for. But we did it. And we told them at the purchase agreement stage that we weren't going to nickel and dime them. During pre-close, we didn't nickel and dime them. And then at close, even though a couple other things came up, we took care of it. It was, a couple $100 here or there. We made it a very simple process for them. And so, and then left them with a business card and said, hey, if you are looking to divest from any other properties in the future, please think of me first. 5 months later, they did. And, brought me $175K extra equity as well. So looking the part and building those relationships from the start, just, you never know where it's going to go, right? So it's extremely powerful.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that. And just the value of just doing what you say you're going to do, right? being a man of integrity and a man of your word there, and not, like, yeah, not nickel and diming them. Because I totally get what, because the first single family I bought was a 1920s build, so
Yeah.
about 100 years old, right? And
Yep.
the inspection report was just through the roof. There were so many things you don't even think of, right,
Yeah.
that come up on that. And, yeah, you could have probably got 10, 15, 20 plus $1,000, maybe,
Mhm.
roughly. But if you would have did that, you wouldn't have had a chance at this $150,000, equity valuation, right? Just from
Yeah.
the start, from the appraisal there. And then that relationship as well. It's huge because you never know what other opportunities might come down the road just from that there. So
Yeah.
no, I think that's about, and so, for our listeners, again, this podcast is definitely tailored to the passive investor. But, a lot of us are, like me, I love this space so much. I I want to educate others on how they can get involved too. And so, if you're going down that road and maybe just looking at, buying a single family or duplex, definitely pay attention to the strategy, that Vince, had going into this. It's scary,
Yeah.
but once you get your foot over that threshold, and Brandon Turner calls it the stack method, right?
Yep.
Two turns into four, four turns into eight turns into 16, and so on and so forth. And then it's like the 16 unit was easier, or just as easy, or if not easier than the duplex,
Yeah.
correct?
No, I can definitely speak to that. That duplex, buying that little 2 unit, $150,000, fairly, for especially us here in Phoenix, very
Mhm.
inexpensive house, right?
Yeah.
Was the scariest purchase I've done to date. And we'll talk a little bit, I think, about where things have gone from there. And so, you mentioned kind of keeping stacking. So because of everything that was happening with the market in 21 and 22, and the equity purchased with that 4 unit, I ended up selling both of those and doing a 1031 exchange to roll that equity into a 15-unit property, also just outside of Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
And
And
real quick,
so,
Vince, on that, can you just
yeah,
explain to the listeners what a 1031 exchange is?
yeah. So a 1031 exchange is it's actually Section 1031 is part of the U.S. federal tax code that allows a person, an LLC, an investor, to sell a property, take all the proceeds from the property through a mediary, right? A third party, usually this is going to be an escrow company or sometimes a standalone service provider that does this. They take those funds, you can't touch them, or it can really muddy things up. And then when you buy another property, those proceeds can roll right into that. And so you don't pay any immediate tax on the sale of that first property, right? Now, what you're doing is you're rolling that forward. So if you sell that next property and you don't roll it into something else, then you would have all that due back taxes. But in theory, you can do that in perpetuity until you die, you leave it to your kids, you have your estate set up the correct way that everything's reset, and you end up never paying taxes on those sales, the realization of those gains. And so it's a very powerful tool. It does have some rules around it, so definitely do more than just listen to me talk a little bit. You have to be able to buy that property in a very limited amount of time. You have to identify the property before that within 180 days, and then you have I think 90 to close. But again, don't take my word for it. Yeah. There's very strict rules. They could even change by the time you're listening to this. So, but no, we knew exactly what we wanted to do with it, and we're confident that we could do that. And so, yeah, paid no taxes on all that realized gain.
Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification. Like Ben said, a very, very powerful tool, for sure.
Yeah.
And so, okay, yeah, you got the duplex, you got the fourplex. So you 1031 these, and let you take it off from there. So what do you do with that? Yeah.
Yeah. So we bought a 15-unit property in Mitchell, South Dakota, about 45 minutes west of Sioux Falls. Actually, the closest residences to the world's only corn palace. So that's a little claim to fame. So the property is called Palace View.
Okay.
But it's a just one large blue building in downtown Mitchell, South Dakota. 15 units, class C, has a laundry, laundry facilities, all that, controlled access. But the building itself was about 80 years old. But it had a brand new roof. I think the roof was 3 years old, and it was actually a gable roof built over a flat roof. So a bit less susceptible to water damage, storm damage, things like that. And it had actually been on the market for a while, around, I think for that one, around 10 months. And they had wanted, a certain price for it, a little bit high. It had been bought by some investors a few years before, where it was severely under market rent and things. So they had been able to clean that up a little bit, drive some value for the property. But it still was at a place where it made sense if I could come in at a price that made sense for me. And so we were able to come in and pick that up. I think it was listed for 1.3 million for the 15 units, which again, for people in Phoenix sounds crazy. And we bought it for 1.065 million. So a decent cut from the asking price and at a rate that made sense for us.
So just curious, when you submitted your LOI on that, did y'all have any communication with the seller before then, or you just totally just sent that LOI and then did they accept that right away, or was there some back and forth? Or
yes, so I had just personally reached out to the broker, the listing broker, and we had a little bit of communication as far as what updates had been made by the sellers, the investors, just so I could build in, what kind of CapEx I could expect going forward. Where were rents? They even pre-LOI, they sent the full rent roll. So they were pretty good to work with. And there was still, maybe a little room in some of the units for some rent increase. But overall, it just was a property that made sense. Again, I lead a data analytics team, so I like to think I'm pretty good at crunching numbers. I've got spreadsheets on spreadsheets, and even though it's kind of a true tertiary market, if you aren't from South Dakota, you've probably never heard of it. Although I have run into people that have been to the world's only corn palace, and so they've been close. Just a solid old building. So we were able to get that under contract. I worked with a local attorney to represent me and close that all up. I think we closed that in just under 60 days. Again, seeing the tail end of that 1031 exchange. And like I said, as crazy as it seems to have, if you've never done a deal, to be working with attorneys and brokers and commercial inspectors and different things, that one was way less scary than that duplex was. And now we're at over $1 million and looking at 15 units and things. So you build that confidence as you go. It was really just taking that first step and keeping the ball rolling.
Yeah. Well, and that's a huge reason why I love the space in multifamily, because my goal at first, I was just going to go buy a bunch of single family homes, right? Fix them up, and hold them for long term, maybe 60, 70 houses and, just live off the cash flow. But the scalability was just not there, right?
Yeah.
And, when you're, like you're saying, you're doing a 16 unit apartment complex, right? I mean, you're 16 doors. That was harder or easier than a duplex. Then you can definitely scale for sure. Yeah,
I think a big part of it that I've realized, and especially as we go into this last purchase, it'll kind of come together. But as you move from residential real estate, so 1 through 4 units, everything up to a fourplex, a quadplex is considered residential. 5 or more units is commercial, and that relates to the types of funding lending available, all kinds of things. But once you get to that 5 or more, there's way more flexibility in how you can structure deals, how you can set up your lending. Certainly in getting into the passive space, the types of structures you can put together. And as I've gotten into bigger and bigger deals, that's what I've enjoyed. Is like it's almost like there's no rules. Anything that you and the seller can come to terms with and agree on, obviously lawyers and fine print and everything, but if you can structure it in a way that makes sense for everyone, it can work. Whereas with that 1 through 4 units, especially if you're using primarily if you're using traditional financing, that banker is going to require certain things, right? Especially if it's a qualifying loan. So, and you're going to have to put 20, 25, 30% down, depending on, things in the market.
Yeah.
Whereas with commercial deals, again, if it makes sense for the seller, depending on what their needs are, if they're looking to obviously roll everything through a 1031 exchange into something bigger, you're going to be a little limited. They're going to want to get all of their money up front. But
Right.
if they just want to maybe replace cash flow, you might be able to play with some different options.
Yeah. A lot of creative strategies there for sure. And I think that's a good segue into what I want to touch on next, Vince, is because I know, all right, you got this 15 unit. And then shortly after that, you get under contract under a 20 unit, right?
Yep.
And so I want to talk about how you structured that deal with the seller, how you brought the capital to the deal, and yeah, just how that process went for you.
Yeah. So the 15 unit we closed in 2022, tail end of 2022. So for the goal for 23 was at least 16 more units, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had been keeping our eye on things. And that's probably a big takeaway is have as many funnels coming into you with those types of leads as you can. So that's talking to brokers, talking to realtors and things in the area. That's certainly working with wholesalers and things, so you can potentially get it at a little bit better buy. And I had actually been following this property really since even, I think, before I bought the 15 unit. There was this 20 unit in Sioux Falls, so in a bigger town, the biggest city in South Dakota. That was a great property, great part of town, very established neighborhood, but they wanted a bit much for it. They wanted 2.7 million, and especially between 2020, early 2023 into late 22 into early 23 and then into 23, rates were going up, and so those deals that were at a little bit lower cap rates were getting harder and harder to make sense of, and it just sat there. And I think it came down maybe 50K or something at some point, maybe 100K, but it still wasn't at a place that made sense for any investors because it stayed on the market for over a year, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, well, it doesn't cost anything to reach out to a broker. It doesn't cost anything to do an LOI, right?
Right.
And so I sent an LOI. I did opt to use my attorney at the LOI stage this time, and basically said, I think this is a great property. We'd love to buy it. I gave a little bit of our background that, we've closed on every deal that we've put a LOI on. We've never had to back out of anything, never retraded. And, but I can meet your price if I can control terms a little bit, basically, right? So I can do 2.6 if I can do, I think 0% financing for 40 years or something, or I can do a little bit less this way or a little bit less this way. I had outlined, I think, 3 options, and then we had some back and forth, but I got a foot in the door, right? And from some initial conversations with the broker, they had said, I asked, is the seller open to seller financing, or is that just a flat no? Like, I can save us both some time, save me some legal costs of having that all drafted up. And he said, yeah, it's going to just depend on what the total package looks like, and said, okay, we have a space to play in now. Right. And so made that offer, and there was some back and forth. And at the end of the day, what it ended up being is 2.3 million with 20% down and 80% of it financed for 30 years, seller financing at 4.19% interest. Right. And even that 20%, the 20% of and it was roughly 26, 450,000 down. I don't have that in cash. I've been acquiring these properties. I work a relatively, you know, middle income, mid corporate job, and don't have a $500,000 laying around, right? And so what I ended up doing for that was, and I worked through a few, again, relationships that I had made in both Phoenix and Sioux Falls, and raised about 250,000 of that through private investors. And so for the next 3 years, those private investors will be getting between 12 and 14% on their money, paid quarterly, just interest. And then at the end of that 3 years, we refinance, they get all their capital back. And so those investors, are happy to be making, a solid fixed return. They don't have any equity. So I also didn't have to get into any syndications and a lot of the legal, you're certainly familiar with a lot of the legalities and things that go with that, and certainly more legal fees. And that's something I'm looking at for this next year. But at this point, I was more comfortable just, putting a note together, or notes for each individual, and they're all tied together. They're all jointly held on the mortgage. And so they have their protections. And those investors, like I said, are making 12 to 14%. They get a check every quarter for the next 3 years, and then they'll have a return to capital. And some of them are even saying, hey, I either myself or through some peers also have more capital. And so we're looking to invest in the next one because of just, again, that transparency throughout the process. And whether they want to be, some of them are a little bit more passive or interested in the real estate itself than others. And so they're like, oh, like I drove by it the other day and saw you guys are doing this. What's that all about? Like, oh, we're, replacing some siding or windows or whatever it might be. Right. And others just like, okay, thanks. Thanks for the check, see you in a quarter. And that's completely fine. Right. It's they're doing this, especially one of them is doing this because he's been a landlord. He's had multiple single family homes. And I think maybe a duplex, and he got tired of the toilet calls, didn't even want to bother with having a property manager. And so he sold all those properties at just about the height of the market and is looking to things to invest it in. And instead of, maybe a 6-7 cap, he's getting 12, 14% on his money. Right. So he's very happy to do that. I'm happy to have gotten into the deal that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to get into. And so again, it's making that win-win for everyone. The seller got the price they wanted, and we're happy with, and they were good with, the seller financing for up to a 5-year window. The investors are getting the return they're looking for. I got into the property at rates and everything that makes sense for me. And I work with a great property manager locally who is cleaning up some of the units, and nothing was bad. It's actually a 70s build that has been extremely well maintained, but not the most updated. Like there's some like 70s chandeliers in some of the units and things like that. So just kind of some updating, kind of lipstick and rouge type stuff. As far as our plans for the next couple of years is just very light remodels, but otherwise the buildings are extremely structurally sound, very well maintained. So yeah, no huge capex expenses. So it was really a home run for everyone.
Yeah. And that's awesome when you can just create those win-win scenarios, right? Everybody wins in the end, because yeah. And I love that seller financing model. And if you could just touch real quick on that, because a lot of people hear seller finance and they're like, why would they do that? Why wouldn't they just want all their capital, up front, right?
Yeah.
So if you could, Vince, just touch on for our listeners why people choose that seller financing route as a seller.
To your point, it's not going to work for everyone, right? Like when I was selling my 2 and 4-plex. If someone wanted that for me to seller finance, that wouldn't make sense for me. I'm looking to move that capital specifically into something bigger, right? But this seller didn't have any urgent plans. He does some very big real estate and commercial things in kind of his other life. But this capital he didn't specifically need urgently. And so it did work for him.
Yeah.
And so but if you don't ask, you're not going to know is the first thing. And then if you ask, they might say no. It might not be it might not align with their goals. It has to be a win for everyone, right? But it also depends on their timeline. He was good with 5 years. He wasn't good with 10, right? I think between 5 and 10 years is when he's looking to retire. So he wants all of it by that point, but he doesn't need it now. There's also tax implications of receiving all of that now, right? Especially if they weren't going to 1031 it into something else, getting, that 2.3 to $2.6 million all at once, they'd have a lot of that chopped off the top, and that'd be hard to balance against anything else they were depreciating and reducing that liability. And so by only receiving, $9,000-$10,000 a month, and the interest being taxed a little bit differently than the principal, it makes a lot more sense for the seller. And so if you dig into the specifics of that and you could find the deal that it works for, it can really, really work for everybody.
Yeah, no, thanks for that explanation. And you've touched right on it too. I mean, one of the biggest, right, is the tax. You don't have to pay it all up front as long as you're not like Vince and rolling that capital into another property and, doing that stack method. There's a lot of benefits. So with that said, if for our listeners, if you are looking to get involved in this space and don't have the capital to put down on a property, right, and just getting started, ask the question like Vince said. You don't know unless you ask. My grandpa taught me that from a really young age. Where's that thing they can say is no, right?
Yep.
And then you know the answer. And sometimes no is just a not right now, right? We learned that in the sales world. Still a maybe, but
no asterisks.
Yes, exactly. My wife hates that because I'm like, all right, well, let's work around this a little bit, But yeah, so all right, you do the seller carry on that. You touched on so many.
I'll kind of, I guess, take a step back. Another reason that worked is because the seller had actually inherited the property from his parents who had built it 30, 40 years prior. And so there was zero debt on this property, right? If someone's only had it a couple years, you might be able to assume their mortgage and do a seller, wrap, right, to get up to whatever their sale price might be. That gets a little more complicated. This one was very clean because they hadn't even mortgaged this property in between building it and when I bought it. And so it was very clean. They just owned this property outright. And so he could sell it for whatever. There was no bank that had to approve it. And so that also makes it very tricky. And there's tools, I think you guys have talked about a couple that you can use to find properties that, maybe don't have any debt against them. And they're not 100%. You always have to do your own due diligence. But you can find these properties that aren't leveraged, which gives you a little bit more likelihood that seller could be interested in seller financing and turn something that is maybe an active requirement, that they have to go fix those toilets on or something like that, to, hey, let me take this off your hands. You'll still get $10,000 a month, but it'll just be ACH deposit into your account, right? You don't have to deal with, Jimmy's late on rent again, Shelly's complaining about Bob next door's music, the toilet calls, all that stuff, right? Painting. You don't have to deal with anything. You just get them their check and they're happy.
Yeah. Well, and thanks for that clarification too. Because more cases than not, the seller owns the property outright. And so, and then also a benefit to the seller is, all right, hey, they set it up, seller financing with Vince here. And if for some reason Vince doesn't make the payments, right, and defaults on the loan, the seller gets to take back over the property.
Yeah.
So it's very low risk. I mean, when you think about it, from a seller point of view. So again, there's a lot of benefits for a seller, which means go back, if you're looking at buying these properties, ask the question. because you can get in for little to sometimes no money down, depending on the deal.
Yeah.
And, you can own an asset, whether it's a twoplex or a 20 unit property, right? And so Vince, I want to touch on a couple of things though, in that is, I love the debt structure you had because, sometimes people get to a point where it's, I don't have 500,000 sitting out,
Yeah.
sitting in the bank, right?
Hate when that happens.
Yeah, right. And so, like, what am I going to do now? And I'm just, saying, oh, no, I guess this property is not for me. Well, all right, let's get creative here. Reach out to some of your network. Hey, I got this property. Here's how we're going to structure it. Because a lot of investors here, I know, something that I really had to look at getting involved in this space is, you hear us talked about in previous episodes. What's your why? What are your goals? What are you looking to achieve out of your investments? And
Yeah.
and what are you doing? If, a lot of times if you're younger, you're probably looking at just building your net worth. So you're probably looking at more equity. But some of the older folks or someone that is good where they're at, they're just looking for cash flow and a place to park their money. I mean, to get 12 to 14%, interest is huge right now.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't just find that, and especially when it's across real estate. I mean, this podcast is tailored to real estate because I love real estate, right? It's brick and mortar asset. You can see it, you can drive by it, right? It's not like the stock market where you just you don't know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And so I believe you mitigate your risk. And of course, we can talk about the tax benefits and, we can talk about a lot of benefits there, but to get 12 to 15 or 12 to 14% on your money is huge. So it's really important. Like when you're looking at the goals, are you a cash flow investor or are you a growth investor? Because if you're a cash flow investor, I would highly encourage you to reach out to someone like Vince and how he's structured on some of these deals, that they call them, debt structures, right? Where, you can just park your money, say you got $100,000, $200,000, give it to Vince and you 12 to 14% on that, right? It's
Yeah.
almost triple of what you're going to make in a high yield savings account right now. So anyways, yeah, I love how you touched on that, Vince, and just that, creative mindset. And I know you're going to be doing some big things coming up this year, possibly getting to that syndication space as well. Because again, the stack method, right? Just
Yeah.
keep compounding and yeah, it's that once you get that snowball rolling, right? It's pretty cool once you look back and see everything that can be done in just a couple years, right? Not even.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, since 2021. So
2021.
this last one was the fourth property, basically the end of that fourth year with a little over a 3-year total span. So
Yeah.
it picks up, like I said, and that first duplex was so scary that it's almost like laughable now. And I think another thing that's just interesting about all this is the first two properties, I didn't even go inside them until after close.
Yeah.
Because I had that local team, that local realtor, and he was great. He'd show up to the property, have me either on Zoom or Skype or pre-record it and upload it to YouTube. And he walked through, dozens of properties until we closed on that first one, and then a few properties in between the first and second. Now, as I got into the commercial side, I flew out there and walked them, a little bit more investment.
A lot bigger dollar amount there you're doing.
Yeah. And so it was worth the, $150, $200, round trip ticket up to Sioux Falls. And obviously I've got family out there. So total cost wasn't too much to fly out there and just double check, like, this is really here. This isn't some big, swindle. But yeah, like, because if your numbers make sense, if you have a team you can trust, then a lot of people will want to walk through every single property. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to live there, right? If it's proven that people will pay whatever the amount is in the rent roll to live there, I don't have to. It doesn't matter what color it is. Doesn't matter. These stairs are laid out weird. It doesn't matter, right? Like, I'm not going to live there. Will people live there, and has that been proven, and is there demand? And is there room to increase rents and still be, at about the median rent for the area? Is there room to grow the property? Is there efficiencies to be made? Because they're like in this latest property, watering the property every single day. There wasn't even like a rain sensor to tell if it had rained or was currently raining. And so I one thing that drives me crazy, and we don't see it much in Phoenix, but is driving by a commercial property typically in a rainstorm and you see their sprinklers go in.
Yeah.
Right. It's just wasteful.
Yeah.
And so especially like in Sioux Falls, which has a much more moderate climate than Phoenix, those don't need to run every day. The heat doesn't require it, and they get rain a few times a month. And so once or twice a week is fine. And so just on the water savings, I'll be able to realize, $50,000 to $80,000 in value for the property, the way the cap rate works. So, and again, being able to control the valuation of your property with commercial, just one more thing that I love.
Yeah, just another benefit, that of force appreciation and how much you can save or add value, how much that increases the value of the property in a whole.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome, Vince. Well, I want to go ahead and transition over to our fire round. I'm going to ask you 4 questions here. And first one being, if you could recommend a book on real estate for investors just getting started out in this space, and then another book on mindset for cultivating, just a positive attitude.
Yeah. So one that leans more on real estate, but has a little bit of the mindset and kind of just that like just get started kind of mentality, is Set for Life by Scott Trench. It's one that I didn't come across. I don't think it was even really written until like 22 or so, but it's one that I have given to like nieces and nephews and friends we know through church and things that are graduating either high school or even college. Because it just really takes, and Scott Trench is the current CEO of Bigger Pockets. And it really takes what he did as far as like house hacking, like during college, and then how to look at your early career and savings, and trying to almost with a little bit of fire mentality built in of like, how high can you get your savings rate? How little can you reasonably live off of? And, do you need a car, or, can you work, somewhere 20, 2 or 3 blocks away and ride a bike or walk there. Right. And then obviously getting into real estate and then flipping and flipping into bigger and bigger properties, and that growth mindset. And so that's one that I've given a lot. And I think if I had read that earlier, I wouldn't have dragged my feet for quite as long in getting into real estate. On the overall mindset, one that I come back to is The One Thing. I think that's something people could read every year and get something a little bit different out of it. My wife and I, just after we bought that first duplex, started doing an annual goal setting retreat. And it started just like a 90-minute thing at our couch. And it's turned into, this last couple of years, a event where we book out the boardroom and a book of rooms at the Crown Plaza in Chandler, have other couple friends join us, and spend an entire weekend billing out what the next year, especially year, but and as how that ties to the next 3, 5, however many years to get to your someday, right? Is how the One Thing book writes it, is what do you want your someday to look like? And then what are the steps, break that down all the way to what they call the now. Like, what could I be doing right now to get myself closer to that? Maybe it's being on a podcast with Jared. Yeah. Maybe it's, setting up, I'm looking to buy my first property. So reaching out to, honestly, a couple realtors and just getting on their funnel lists, right? So you're getting those properties as soon as they drop sent to you. You can take it, look at it, like, not that part of town, get rid of it. And just what's that next right thing that gets you closer to your goal? So yeah, The One Thing and Set for Life.
Yeah, no, great books. I haven't read Set for Life, but The One Thing, I just go and listen to chapters sometimes and just, redo. I mean, I've probably played that book maybe 4 times. So yeah, great book. Highly recommend listening to that if you haven't already. And if you have already, re-listen to it again because there's
Yeah.
so much content in there, right? That you can gain from. So, all right, well, cool. Let's go to the next question here. What is a practical first step that the audience can take to explore explore the space of passive investing?
Yeah. I mean, beyond just, like starting, which, you've mentioned, I've mentioned, like at some point you got to just jump in. You're not going to know everything.
Right.
I think a big supporter of that is having a tribe, right? So go to that meetup. And even though, my experience with the meetup, it wasn't bad, and it wasn't even anyone there like that I felt was judging me or anything like that. But because I was around people that had been there and done that, and had seen successes, and were talking about their successes and their failures, right? I knew it wouldn't, always be easy, but I knew it was possible because I saw, I said it, I'm, first couple visits, I'm just getting started, looking to buy in this area. Like, oh, why are you interested in that area? And they could say, okay, so and so also invest in that area, right? Or at least maybe in the Midwest, right?
Right.
They're a long distance investor, and you talk to them, they're like, okay, well, if you're long distance investing, you probably want a property manager, a trustworthy contractor, a realtor to walk these for you, things like that, right? And they'll help you start building that team and advise you of what next steps might look like, and strategies within whatever niche you're looking to do. Because you can, just like you and I did, you can read those books, you can listen to the podcast, watch the YouTubes, whatever it is, until you're, red in the face. But you need some accountability. And so whether it's attending a meetup or even, and some, there's also, masterminds and things, and do your research on them. Some have more value than others as far as what you'll, be able to take with you, and the accountability that will come with it. But find someone to hold you accountable, whether it's someone at that meetup to say, hey, I want to do this in 6 months. Can can we grab coffee and you hold me accountable once a month to, review 10 properties a week or whatever it might look like, right? So find your tribe and have that accountability.
Yeah, no, I love that. Just community is everything for sure. Okay, next question here. What is a daily habit you practice keeping you on track towards your goals?
Uh, Definitely got a few different habits across our different goals. Like I talked about our goal setting retreat we do every year.
Yeah.
But I think as far as it relates to real estate, um, it's and kind of taking a half step back to the last question is that accountability.
Mhm.
I've definitely strengthened my relationship with quite a few people from that original meetup, local to Sioux Falls, a couple different circles. And I put a little bit out on social media. And so if I say I'm going to do something, like there's that accountability of like, I need to do it. And so it's keeping communication with those people who will hold me accountable. Like, yeah, I'm not calling them every day. I'm not, don't want to be annoying like that or anything, but, they post something. So, oh, hey, how'd you do that? Right. Like, oh, like I've heard of this, but I heard this was a problem. And especially if you're surrounding yourself with people that are maybe a step or two ahead of you in whatever process you're trying to do, then you'll be able to almost, follow in their footsteps a little bit, and your path is going to be a little different.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest things I've learned, and it's been a mindset shift for myself as I've grown in this real estate journey, is when I started with that duplex, I thought, similar to yourself, I'm going to buy a bunch of two to 4 unit properties because, I can save up that down payment every year and put it in and put that down and save up for the next one, put it down, and eventually have something. But if you're going to stack, then that doesn't work, right? I can buy, I can maybe get the down payment on a duplex, maybe 2 4s, but I can't put the down payment on a $2.5 million property, certainly every year.
Yeah.
And so you learn that you do have to work with people. You do have to, create syndications or partnerships, JVs, to be able to continue to grow at the rate that we're looking to, and we have. And so building, growing, and maintaining those relationships, keeping in contact with people has been huge.
Yeah. Well, and I love that question because, pretty much everybody in this space is, got somebody to keep them accountable, is practicing a daily habit that just is going to prioritize that one thing, right? To get them to their goals. It's yeah, I just love that. And and then so the segue into the next question. So with that, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would that be?
Yeah, and I think similar. So if I could be remembered for one thing, it'd be what I've experienced through all this, through building those relationships, is being helpful, right?
Right.
One thing that surprised me as well, is how helpful so many people want to be. You would think that like, oh, if we're all kind of in the same space, like people aren't gonna want to like give me feedback on applying for this, or sending an LOI out to this deal. If it's a deal that makes sense, they might get an LOI in before me.
Mm.
And I'm sure there's, bad actors or whatever here or there. But for the overwhelming majority of people that I've met in this space, especially those that are ahead of you, they have no problem, reaching a hand back to help pull you along, right? If they see that, especially once you've done a deal or two, you've proven that you're not just a tire kicker, you're not that imposter, right?
Mhm.
That people can see that, and people respect that and want to, it also feels good to be a teacher, right? To show people how you've done it, and the successes you've realized, and help them apply that to whatever situation's there. And so for me to, at a lot of these meetups, it honestly is humbling every now and then, like the people that were doing these multi-million-dollar deals, like that's me now. And so when someone comes in that hasn't done anything, I make a point to make sure I'm talking to them, that they're not just like alone in a corner. And there's still going to be a lot of people that come to things like that and don't do anything.
Yeah.
But if I can, catch one or two of them and be a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of helpful advice that gets them that first deal, that starts that snowball rolling,
Right.
that's huge for me. So just being able to be helpful and, be someone that helps light the way.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, we touched on that earlier, right? Is just that new person coming into that meetup, and now you can help them out. And so if anybody, wants to connect with Vince, I highly encourage y'all to reach out to him. And Vince, if you could, just tell people where they can connect with you.
Yeah, I think probably the most frequently updated is just Mathis Fam Properties on Instagram. Also got Mathis Family Properties .co, but Instagram is honestly most updated. So that, or management at mathisfamilyproperties.co.
Awesome. Well, again, reach out to Vince. That's another thing I love about this space is, majority of the people here, have been where you're at. And now that they have a little success, they're more than willing to help you, walk you through that, exact formula of what they did. And again, everything's going to be a little different depending on the circumstance, but yeah, just reach out to a mentor, take some steps, definitely educate yourselves. There's a ton of resources. And if you've found this interview today valuable, like I have, I learned a lot, and just the creative ways to go out and buy real estate, please share it with a friend, family member, anybody that you think could benefit from this podcast. We're just here to educate others on these alternative investments. So with that, Vince, thanks again for sharing your story with us today, and I'm sure we'll be talking to each other soon. Thank you for listening to the Optimal Wealth Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, be sure to optimize your results and take massive action on what you have learned here today. For more, visit optimalequitygroup.com.